I've spent half my life looking at people across an interrogation table or a stage. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that the truth doesn't have a script. It doesn't need one. When you're telling the truth, you don't have to remember what you said 10 minutes ago because the facts stay the same. But during my years in the Chicago Police Department, I saw it all. I saw the killers who thought they could outsmart the badge, the thieves who swore on their mother's lives they weren't there, and the cowards who preyed on the weak because they thought nobody was looking. I've carried that badge. I've worn the uniform of a United States Marine, and I've stood my ground when people much bigger and much meaner than the guys I see today try to push me back. You don't do this job as long as I have without developing a sense for the rot. I can smell a lie before the person even opens their mouth. I see it in the way they won't hold eye contact, the way they fidget with their hands, or the way they try to play the victim when they're the ones holding the knife. People ask me all the time why I'm so hard on these guests, why I get in their faces. It's because I'm tired of the games. I'm tired of people thinking they can walk through life leaving a trail of broken hearts and ruined lives and then expect a handshake and a how do you do when they're finally caught. My patience for excuses ran out a long time ago. If you come onto my stage, you better be ready for the reality of what you've done, because I'm not here to be your friend. I'm here to stand up for the people you stepped on. Today was different though. Or maybe it was just more of the same, just a different face. I was sitting in my dressing room looking at the files and I saw a name, David. On paper, David looked like a guy who had it all figured out. He had a job, he had a house, and apparently he had enough love in his heart for 2 different women in 2 different towns who had no idea the other existed. I've seen some low things, but the double life that's a special kind of calculated evil, it's not a mistake. You don't accidentally buy 2 engagement rings. You don't accidentally spend 3 years telling one woman you're working late while you're actually tucking another woman in the bed. That takes work. That takes a level of deception that most people can't even wrap their heads around. It's a full-time job being that much of a piece of garbage. I looked at the photos of the women, Maria and Jennifer. They look like good people. They look like people who believed in the person they were waking up next to. And then there was David. When I walked out onto that stage and saw him sitting there, looking all polished and prepared, I knew exactly how this was going to go. He thought he was the smartest guy in the room. He thought he could spin some story about how he was confused or how things just happened. He didn't realize he was about to hit a brick wall. I walked out, and the air in the studio was heavy. You could feel it. The audience knew something was up, but Maria, the woman sitting next to David, she looked like she was holding onto a cliff with her fingernails. She had been with him for 4 years. They had plans. They talked about a future. And then there was the other chair, the empty one. I knew who was coming out next, but David didn't know I knew everything. He sat there with his hands folded, trying to look like a concerned partner. I didn't even say hello. I just stood there, looking at him, letting the silence do the work. Silence is a funny thing. Most people are terrified of it. They feel the need to fill it with words, and usually those words are lies. I let him sit in it for a good 30 seconds. I wanted him to feel the weight of every person in that room looking at him. I wanted him to realize that his little game of hide and seek was over. I remember thinking about my time on the force, those long nights in the box where you just wait for the guy to crack. David was already cracking. He just didn't know it yet. He kept glancing at Maria, trying to give her that "don't worry, honey" look, but she wasn't looking back. She was looking at the floor. She knew something was wrong. Her gut was telling her what her heart didn't want to hear. I started by asking him a simple question. I asked him if he loved Maria. He didn't hesitate. "Of course I do, Steve. She's my world." I almost laughed. It's a word people like him use a lot, world. It sounds big, it sounds important, but to a guy like David, his world is only as big as the lie he's currently telling. I asked him where he was last Tuesday. He gave me some story about a business trip in Cincinnati. He had the details down: the hotel, the meeting, the flight delay. He was good, I'll give him that. He had practiced, but I had a file in my hand that said he wasn't in Cincinnati. He was 3 hours away at a birthday dinner for a woman named Jennifer. I watched his face as I mentioned the name, just a flicker. A tiny muscle in his jaw tightened. That's all I needed. I've seen that look on men who just realized the police found the weapon. It's the look of a man who realizes the exits are all locked. I didn't bring Jennifer out right away. I wanted to see how far he would go. I wanted to see if he would lie to my face while I was holding the truth in my hand, and he did. He looked me straight in the eye and said, "I don't know any Jennifer, Steve. You must have the wrong guy." That was the moment. That was the moment where my blood started to boil. I don't like being lied to, but I really don't like it when someone lies to me while they're hurting someone else right in front of me. I looked at Maria and I saw the first tear fall. She knew, even without the proof, she knew. I told David to stay right there. I told him not to move an inch. I walked over to the side of the stage and I called out Jennifer. When she walked out, the whole energy of the room shifted from tension to pure, unadulterated shock. Jennifer didn't look angry. She looked destroyed. She was carrying a folder of her own. She walked right up to the stage, and when David saw her, he didn't even try to stand up. He just sank into that chair. He looked like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. I've seen a lot of things, but the look on Maria's face when she realized who this woman was, that's something that stays with you. It wasn't just anger. It was the sound of a person's entire reality shattering. Everything she thought she knew about her life for the last few years was a lie. Every "I love you," every anniversary, every plan for the future, it was all built on a foundation of sand. And David, he just sat there. The smartest guy in the room suddenly had nothing to say. I didn't let him stay silent for long. I pulled the chair up right in front of him, so close our knees were almost touching. I wanted him to feel my breath. I wanted him to know that there was nowhere left to run. "All right, David," I said, my voice low. "Maria says you're her fiance. Jennifer says you're her husband. Why don't you explain to me how that works?" He sat there blinking, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. I've seen that look 1,000 times on guys who think they're smoother than they actually are. They spend so much time spinning webs that they eventually get tangled in their own silk. David tried to look at Jennifer, then at Maria, but he couldn't hold either of their gazes for more than a second. He looked at me, hoping for some kind of mercy, but he wasn't going to find any. I don't have mercy for men who treat women like disposable property. I told him again, louder this time, to explain it. I wanted the audience to hear the garbage that was about to come out of his mouth. He finally cleared his throat and started with the most pathetic line in the book. He said it was complicated. Complicated. That's the word cowards use when they don't want to admit they're liars. I told him there's nothing complicated about a marriage license and an engagement ring. It's actually very simple. It's called being a fraud. It's called being a manipulator. I looked at Jennifer and asked her how long they'd been married. 7 years, she said. Her voice was thin, like it was about to snap. 7 years, and they had 2 kids at home who thought their daddy was away on a long-term construction project. That hit me hard. It's one thing to cheat on a girlfriend. It's another thing entirely to abandon your children for weeks at a time to go play house with another woman who has no idea you're a father. I turned my attention back to David. I asked him if he had pictures of his kids in his wallet. He didn't answer. He just stared at his shoes. I've seen some cold people in my life, but the level of detachment this guy had was staggering. He had managed to compartmentalize his entire existence. To Maria, he was the bachelor who worked in logistics and traveled for work. To Jennifer, he was the husband who was trying to provide for his family by taking out-of-town contracts. He was living in the spaces between the lies. I asked Maria when he proposed to her. She said it was 6 months ago on a beach in Florida. She pulled out her phone and showed a picture of the 2 of them smiling, the sunset behind them. She looked so happy in that photo, so full of hope. Then I looked at Jennifer. I asked her where David was that week. She didn't even have to think about it. She said he told her he was at a safety certification seminar in Orlando. He used a work trip to propose to another woman. The level of calculation involved in that is sociopathic. You have to plan the flights, the excuses, the budget. You have to make sure the credit card statements don't overlap. You have to make sure you don't call one woman by the other's name while you're lying in bed with her. It's a sickness. David tried to interrupt then. He started saying that he had planned on telling Jennifer he wanted a divorce, but he didn't want to hurt her. I stopped him right there. I got up out of my chair and stood over him. I told him to never use the word hurt again. You don't get to talk about not wanting to hurt people when you've been stabbing them in the back every single day for years. You didn't stay because you didn't want to hurt her. You stayed because you're a narcissist who liked having two lives. You liked the thrill of the secret. You liked having a home base with a wife and kids and a getaway spot with a fiance who treated you like a king because she didn't know the truth. I asked him if he thought about his kids when he was putting that ring on Maria's finger. He didn't have an answer. He never had an answer. Guys like David always think they can talk their way out of the room, but when the room is filled with the truth, there's no air left for their lies. I turned to the audience and I could see the disgust on their faces. It mirrored exactly what I was feeling. Then Jennifer opened that folder she was carrying. She didn't just have words, she had receipts. She had the joint bank account statements. She showed me a withdrawal for $5,000 from 3 months ago. She looked at Maria and asked if that was when she got her engagement ring. Maria's face went pale. She nodded slowly. That was the moment the floor dropped out for her. It wasn't just that he was a liar, it was that he was using his wife's money, the money meant for his children's future, for their mortgage, for their food to buy a ring for another woman. That's a different level of low. That's not just infidelity, that's theft. It's a betrayal of the highest order. I took the bank statement from Jennifer and held it in front of David's face. I asked him how he could look at himself in the mirror knowing he was stealing from his own children to fund a fantasy. He tried to say it was his money too, that he worked for it. I told him he didn't work for anything. A man who doesn't honor his commitments doesn't deserve the title of a worker or a father or a husband. He's just a squatter in a life he doesn't deserve. Maria was shaking now. She looked like she was going to be sick. She told me that they had already put a down payment on a wedding venue. She had invited her parents. Her father was supposed to fly in from overseas to walk her down the aisle. She looked at David and asked him, "Who were you going to have at the wedding, David? Who were you going to bring as your family? Were you just going to hire actors? Or were you going to tell me they all died in a plane crash?" It was a valid question. When you're that deep in a lie, the only way out is more lies, bigger lies, crazier lies. I've seen it happen. I've seen guys fake their own deaths to get out of a corner they painted themselves into. David just sat there, cornered and pathetic. The cool, calm guy from the beginning of the show was gone. In his place was a small, hollow man who realized that his double life had just collided in front of millions of people. I asked him if there was anyone else. He said no. I asked him again, and I leaned in so close I could see the sweat on his forehead. Is there a third woman, David? Is there a fourth? Because a guy like you don't just stop at two. You're addicted to the deception. He swore there wasn't, but I didn't believe him. I don't believe anything a liar says when they're caught. I only believe what I can prove. I looked at Jennifer. I asked her why she stayed as long as she did. She said she had suspicions, but every time she brought him up, he made her feel like she was crazy. He gaslit her. He told her she was being insecure, that her imagination was running wild, that he was working his fingers to the bone for the family, and this was the thanks he got. That's the classic move of the predator. You turn the victim's intuition against them. You make them feel like the villain for noticing the truth. It's a form of psychological abuse, plain and simple. I've seen it in domestic violence cases for decades. The physical bruises are one thing, but the way a man like David can dismantle a woman's mind, making her doubt her own eyes and ears, that's a scar that doesn't fade. I told Jennifer she wasn't crazy. I told her she was right all along. And I told Maria that the man she loved didn't exist. He was a character played by a very bad actor. The person she thought she was going to marry was a ghost. The reality was the man sitting in that chair, a man who didn't have the courage to even look her in the eye. The tension was peaking. I could feel the audience wanting to jump out of their seats. There's something about a double life that gets under people's skin more than a one-night stand. It's the sheer endurance of the lie. It's the fact that he went to sleep and woke up every day for years, choosing to deceive the people who loved him most. It wasn't a moment of weakness, it was a lifestyle. I decided it was time to move to the next step. I had the results of the polygraph in my pocket. I hadn't mentioned it yet. I wanted him to think he might get away with some of it, but the polygraph doesn't care about your excuses. It doesn't care about your complicated situation. It measures the physiological response to a lie. and David's heart must have been pounding like a drum during that test. I pulled the envelope out, and the room went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. This was the moment of truth, the point of no return. I looked at David one last time before opening it. I gave him one last chance to be a man and just admit everything. I told him, David, if you've got any scrap of decency left, you'll tell these women the whole truth right now. Don't let a piece of paper do it for you. He just looked away. He couldn't do it. He was a coward to the very end. I held the envelope in my hand, feeling the weight of it. To David, this was just a piece of paper, but to Maria and Jennifer, it was the final nail in the coffin of their trust. I looked at the two of them. They were sitting on the same stage, two women who should have never met under these circumstances, bound together by the betrayal of one man. I've seen this look before, the look of someone waiting for a medical diagnosis they already know is going to be bad. I turned back to David. He was sweating now, real sweat, the kind that breaks out when you realize the game is over. I didn't rush it. I wanted him to feel every second of that silence. I wanted him to understand that he had brought this on himself. I slowly opened the envelope and pulled out the results. I didn't even have to read the whole thing to know what it said. I've read thousands of these. The data doesn't lie. I looked David right in the eye. I asked him the first question. David, did you tell Maria that you were never married and had no children? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. I looked at the paper. The polygraph determined that was a lie. Deception indicated. Maria put her head in her hands and started to sob. It's a sound you never get used to, the sound of a heart breaking in real time, but I wasn't done. I asked him the second question. Did you take money from your joint account with your wife, Jennifer, to pay for the engagement ring and secret trips with Maria? Again, silence from the man in the chair. Deception indicated. Now Jennifer was up. She couldn't sit still anymore. She was pacing the stage, screaming at him, asking him how he could do that to their kids. She mentioned their daughter's dental surgery that they couldn't afford last month. And there it was. The real cost of his double life. It wasn't just the lies, it was the deprivation. He was stealing from his daughter's health to fund the lie. I've dealt with a lot of criminals, and the ones who steal from their own children are the ones I have the least respect for. I stood up and walked right into David's personal space. I don't care about professional distance when I'm looking at a man who lets his kids suffer so he can play big shot with a girlfriend. I told him he was a piece of trash. I didn't say it to be mean. I said it because it's a fact. If you prioritize your ego and your sexual escapades over your child's medical needs, you have failed at the most basic level of being a human being. David tried to mutter something about how he was going to pay it back, but I shut him down. You don't pay back a childhood. You don't pay back the trust of a woman who has spent 7 years building a life with you. I looked at the final question on the polygraph. This was the one that usually breaks the whole thing wide open. David, are there other women besides Maria and Jennifer that you are currently involved with? He looked at me, and for a second, I saw a flash of defiance. He thought he could still win. He said, no, Steve, absolutely not. I looked at the result. I looked at the audience. I looked back at him. That, I said, leaning in so our foreheads were almost touching, is a lie. Deception indicated. Big time. The studio erupted. It was like a bomb went off. Maria and Jennifer both looked at him with a mixture of horror and realization. He wasn't even loyal to his second life. He was just a serial predator, a man who collected women like trophies and discarded them when the reality of life got too heavy. I asked him who she was. Who was the third woman? He wouldn't give a name. He just sat there, stone-faced. That's the thing about guys like David. When they're finally caught, they don't feel remorse for the people they hurt. They only feel sorry for themselves because they can't keep the plate spinning anymore. They're addicted to the secret. I turned to the women. I told them both the same thing. He is not going to change. You can't fix a man who doesn't think he's broken. You can't love the good out of someone who has a hole where their conscience should be. I told Jennifer to go home, get a lawyer, and protect her kids. I told her to take every cent he had left because he had already proven he wouldn't use it for them. I told Maria she was lucky. She didn't think so at the moment. She was devastated, but I told her that finding this out now, before she walked down that aisle, was the greatest gift she could ever receive. She was escaping a life of misery. She was escaping a man who would have eventually left her for woman number 4, 5, or 6. I've seen the end of this story 100 times. It ends with the man alone, broke and bitter, wondering why nobody wants anything to do with him. I look back at David. He was trying to act like he didn't care, trying to look tough for the cameras, but I saw his hand shaking. He knew. He knew that when he walked out those doors, his life as he knew it was over. He had no home to go to. Jennifer wasn't going to let him back in, and Maria sure as hell wasn't going to be his backup plan. He had burned every bridge he had ever built, and he did it for nothing. He did it for the cheap thrill of a lie. I asked him one last thing. I asked him if it was worth it. Was it worth losing your kids? Was it worth being exposed as a fraud in front of the whole world? He didn't have an answer. He just stared into the void. I don't think he even knew why he did it. People like him, they just keep moving, keep lying, because the truth is too terrifying to face. They can't stand the sight of themselves, so they create versions of themselves that other people might love. But eventually, the masks fall off. I felt a deep sense of fatigue then, not the kind of tired you feel after a long day of work, but a soul-deep exhaustion from seeing the same patterns of human cruelty over and over again. I've spent decades pulling back the curtain on these people, and it never gets easier to see the wreckage they leave behind. I looked at Maria, who was being comforted by one of my producers, and Jennifer, who was staring at David with a cold, hard clarity I hadn't seen before. The spell he had over them was broken. That's the only good thing that comes out of a day like this. The truth is a wrecking ball, but sometimes you have to tear down a house built on lies before you can build something real on the foundation. I told David to get off my stage. I didn't want him sitting in that chair for one more second. He stood up, tried to walk out with his head held high, but the audience let him have it. They saw him for exactly what he was. As he walked off, I stayed there for a moment. I didn't follow him. I stayed with the women. I wanted them to know that I saw them. I wanted them to know that their pain was valid. This wasn't just a show to me. This was their life. I told them that the next few months were going to be the hardest they've ever faced, but they were already stronger than they knew. They had survived the monster. They had looked at the person they loved and realized he was a stranger, and they were still standing. That takes a kind of courage David will never understand. I've always said that I'm not a judge or a jury, but I am a man who believes in accountability. And today, David was held accountable. It wasn't a prison sentence, but in many ways, it was worse. He had to face himself, and I don't think he liked what he saw. I walked toward the edge of the stage, looking out at the audience, and then back at the empty chairs where David had been sitting. The anger was still there, simmering under the surface, but it was joined by a sense of justice. It's a small victory in a world that often feels like it's losing its moral compass. But I'll take the small victories. I'll take the moments where the liar is exposed and the victims are heard. That's why I do this. That's why I keep coming back to the stage, day after day, year after year. Because as long as there are people like David out there, there needs to be someone willing to stand in our way and say, not today, not on my watch. I stood there on the edge of the stage, the lights hot on my neck, watching David's back as he disappeared through the curtain. The audience was still humming, a low vibration of anger and disbelief that filled the room. I've been in riot situations, I've been in high-speed chases, and I've been in the middle of domestic disputes where the air was thick with the threat of violence. But this was a different kind of heavy. This was the weight of years of calculated deception crashing down in 1 hour. I looked at the 2 empty chairs where the women had been sitting before my producers took them backstage to talk to our counselors. I thought about the kids. That's what always gets me. People think I'm just an angry guy who likes to yell. They don't get it. I'm angry because I've seen the wreckage. I've seen the children who grow up wondering why their father wasn't there or why he was always working, only to find out decades later that he was just a coward who couldn't commit to the life he chose to create. I think about my time as a cop in Chicago. I used to see guys who thought they were players, guys who thought that having multiple families made them a man. It doesn't. It makes you a parasite. A real man takes care of his responsibilities. He shows up. He tells the truth, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. David wasn't a man. He was a shell. He was a vacuum that sucked the life out of everyone around him to fill his own ego. I walked back to my chair, but I didn't sit down. I just leaned against the back of it, looking out at the people in the stands. Some of them were crying. Some of them were just staring, shell-shocked. They come to the show to see drama, sure, but when they see something this real, this visceral, it hits home. Everyone has been lied to. Everyone knows the sting of betrayal, but seeing it weaponized like this, it's a reminder of how fragile our trust in each other really is. I started talking to the audience, but I was really talking to myself. I told them that what we just saw wasn't just a cheating story, this was a crime of the spirit. There's no law that says you can't tell a woman you love her while you're married to someone else. There's no handcuffs for a man who promises a future he knows he'll never deliver. But just because it's not illegal doesn't mean it's not wrong. In my world, the world I grew up in, and the world I protected on the streets, your word is your bond. If you don't have your word, you have nothing. You're just a ghost walking around in a suit. I've seen guys like David in the military too, the ones who try to shirk their duties, who try to manipulate the system so they don't have to carry their share of the pack. They always get found out. The weight of the lie eventually becomes too much to carry. You can't run a marathon while you're holding your breath. And that's what a double life is. It's a slow suffocation of everything that makes you human. I thought about Maria's father. She had said he was flying in from overseas. Can you imagine that? A man who probably worked his whole life to give his daughter a better future, getting on a plane thinking he's going to see her start a family, only to find out the man she's marrying is already a husband and a father. That's the kind of pain that doesn't just go away with a sorry. That's the kind of shame that ripples through an entire family. And Jennifer, she's the one I really worry about. She's the one who has to go home to those kids tonight. She's the one who has to look at their faces and decide how much of the truth they can handle. How do you tell a child that their hero is a fraud? How do you explain that the money for their teeth or their school was spent on a diamond ring for a stranger? You don't. You just hold them and try to be the strength that their father wasn't. I've had people tell me I should be more therapeutic, that I should try to understand the root cause of why a guy like David does what he does. Maybe he had a bad childhood. Maybe he has an addiction to validation. I don't care. I really don't. Because at the end of the day, we all have choices. We all have things that happen to us, but that doesn't give us a license to destroy other people. I'm not a therapist. I'm a guy who believes in right and wrong. I believe that if you do something this cruel, you deserve to be called out on it. You deserve to feel the heat. You deserve to be uncomfortable. The world is too full of people making excuses for bad behavior. Oh, he's just going through a midlife crisis. No, he's a liar. Oh, she's just confused. No, she's a manipulator. We need to stop using soft words for hard truths. I looked over at my producer, Dan, who was giving me the signal that we were nearing the end of the segment, but I wasn't ready to stop. I wanted to make sure that everyone watching understood the gravity of what had happened here. This wasn't just a TV segment. This was the end of a family and the end of a dream. I spent years in those back rooms after the show talking to these women as they wait for their cars. They're usually shaking. They're usually wondering, how did I miss the signs? I always tell them the same thing. Don't you dare blame yourself. A professional liar is good at what they do. They know how to mirror you. They know how to give you exactly what you're looking for so you won't look too closely at what's behind the curtain. David was a pro. He wasn't some guy who got caught in a moment of weakness. He was a craftsman of deception. I wanted to leave them with something, a message that wasn't just about the anger. I wanted to talk about the victim's resilience. I've seen women like Jennifer and Maria come back to the show a year later, and the transformation is incredible. When you get rid of a weight like David, you don't just survive, you thrive. You start to see the world in color again because you're not living in the gray fog of someone else's lies. I wanted them to know that while today felt like the end of the world, it was actually the first day of their real lives. The fake life was over. The truth was out. And while the truth is painful, it's also the only thing that can set you free. I've seen it on the job, and I see it here every day. I remember the case back in Chicago, a guy who had 2 different wives in 2 different precincts. When we caught him, he tried to tell me he did it because he loved too much. I told him then, and I'll say it now, that's not love. Love is sacrifice. Love is being there when things are boring, when things are hard, and when things are ugly. What David did wasn't love, it was consumption. He was a consumer of people. He used Maria for the excitement of a new relationship, and he used Jennifer for the stability of a home. He took what he wanted from both and gave nothing real in return. It's the ultimate form of selfishness. And as I stood there on that stage, I felt a sense of pride that I could be the one to help tear that fantasy down. I don't mind being the bad guy in the eyes of a liar. I've been called worse by better men. I looked at the camera, thinking about the millions of people watching at home. Maybe there was another David out there, sitting on his couch, sweating because he knows his own house of cards is about to fall. I hope so. I hope he sees this and realizes that it's only a matter of time. You can't outrun the truth forever. It's like a shadow. It's always right behind you, and the faster you run, the longer it stretches. I wanted this episode to be a warning. I wanted it to be a shield for the women who feel like something is wrong but are being told they're crazy. Trust your gut. It's the best piece of equipment you were ever given. If it feels like a lie, it probably is. If he's too perfect, he's probably hiding something. And if you're the one lying, stop. Just stop. Because eventually, you're going to end up in a chair across from someone like me, and I won't have any sympathy for you. I took a deep breath. The studio was quieter now, the initial shock having settled into a somber reflection. I could hear the muffled sounds of the crew preparing for the next segment, but I stayed in that moment. I thought about the long drive home, the way I'd probably sit in my car for a few minutes in the garage before going inside, just decompressing from the intensity. People ask how I leave it at the office. The truth is, I don't. You carry a piece of every story with you. You carry the look in Maria's eyes and the tremor in Jennifer's voice. You carry it because it reminds you why you're doing this. It reminds you that the rank error between right and wrong isn't just a suggestion, it's the foundation of a civilized society. Without it, we're just animals tearing each other apart. The studio goes quiet in a way people don't understand unless they've been there. It's not the silence of an empty room, it's the silence of a vacuum where the air has just been sucked out. The cameras were still there, the lights were still humming, but the energy was spent. I stood in the center of that stage for a long time after David walked off. I didn't want to move yet. I needed a second to let the poison out of my system. Dealing with a guy like that, someone who can lie to your face while you're holding the proof, it's draining. It's like trying to hold on to a snake. You have to squeeze so hard just to keep it from slipping away that your hands start to ache. I looked down at the floor, at the scuff marks from the chairs, and I thought about how many people had sat there and had their lives changed in 44 minutes. For David, it was the end of his game. For those women, it was the end of their innocence. I could still see the faint outline of where the polygraph chair had been, the place where a man's entire manufactured reality finally came apart at the seams. I walked backstage, past the monitors and the cables, and I saw Maria and Jennifer sitting together in the hallway. They weren't fighting, they weren't screaming. They were just sitting there, shoulder to shoulder, looking at the wall. That's the irony of a double life. The two women who were supposed to be enemies, the wife and the mistress, ended up being the only two people on the planet who truly understood what the other was going through. They were members of a club nobody wants to join. I walked over to them and I didn't say much. I'm not a hugger. I'm not the guy who's going to give you a long speech about healing. I just looked at him and said, "You're better off." Jennifer looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen, and she just nodded. She knew she had a long road ahead of her: divorce, child support, explaining things to her babies, but for the first time in years, she wasn't living in a fog. She was on solid ground. Even if that ground was cold and hard, it was real. I watched them walk toward the exit, two strangers who were now bonded by a tragedy they didn't ask for. I hope they stayed in touch. Sometimes the only person who can help you heal from a liar is the other person he lied to. I went into my dressing room and shut the door. I sat on the edge of the sofa and just stared at the wall for a minute. People think this is just television, but for me, it's a continuation of the work I started in Chicago. It's about holding the line. It's about making sure that the people who think they can hide in the shadows realize that there's always a light coming for them. David thought he was a ghost. He thought he could move through lives without leaving a footprint. But he forgot that eventually the snow melts and the tracks show up. I thought about my own family, about the importance of being able to look your wife and kids in the eye every single day and know you haven't betrayed them. That's what a real man does. He doesn't need two lives because he's man enough to handle the one he's got. I thought about the thousands of other stories I've heard, the ones that didn't make it to TV, the ones that are happening right now in apartments and houses across the country. It's a heavy thought knowing that for every David we catch, there are 10 more out there still playing the game. I could still hear the distant sounds of the audience leaving the building. Their voices were low, probably arguing about what they'd seen, probably wondering if their own partners were telling the truth. That's the collateral damage of a guy like David. He doesn't just hurt his own women, he seeds doubt in everyone who hears his story. He makes the world a little bit more cynical, a little bit more guarded, and that's what pisses me off the most. He steals more than just money or time. He steals our ability to believe in each other. But as I sat there, I realized that for every David I encounter, there are hundreds of good people who are just trying to do the right thing. There are women like Jennifer who will fight for their kids until their last breath. There are people who still believe that the truth matters even when it's ugly. That's what keeps me going. It's the belief that the truth is worth the fight. I stood up, grabbed my jacket, and headed for the exit. My work there was done for the day, but I knew I'd be back tomorrow to do it all over again. There's always another liar, always another victim, always another story that needs to be brought into the light. And as long as I've got a voice in the stage, I'm going to be the one standing there ready to take the hit because someone has to. Someone has to be the one to say enough. As I walked out to my car, the cold air hit my face and it felt good. It felt clean. The truth is a lot like that air. It might be cold, it might bite, but it's the only thing that makes you feel alive. If you're living a lie, stop. Not for me, not for the show, but for yourself. Because the truth is coming for you, and it doesn't take prisoners. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other. If you suspect something is wrong, don't ignore it. Your life is too valuable to spend it living someone else's fiction. Stand up for the truth, even when it's the hardest thing you've ever done. Trust your gut, protect your family, and never settle for anything less than the whole truth. It's the only way to live.